Yo, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My guest today is Steve Krasner. He wrote for the Providence Journal for 33 years, and he covered the Boston Red Sox primarily and the New England Patriots for 22 of those 33 years. So definitely great to have him on today. We talk about the fact that he's got a Baseball Hall of Fame vote and who he did and didn't vote for. So he and I have a nice back and forth on our differing opinions there, what it's like to be a sports writer for all those years and deadlines and all the cool stories and games that he's covered during his career. So great to have Steve Krasner on. As always, you can follow the show at Too Tall Sports Podcast. You can follow me on YouTube and please subscribe there and hit the bell notification and make sure you get notified every time we drop an episode, which is usually on Thursdays. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm there as well at Too Tall Sports. If you want to follow me on Apple Podcasts, that'd be great. You can subscribe there, leave a comment if you will, drop a review, and hit the 5-star if you believe the show is 5-star worthy. So we appreciate the support. We want to help keep getting exposure out to as many people as we can. So we're everywhere on all platforms for Spotify. We're on, like I said, YouTube, Apple, Pandora, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, we're there. So and if you want to email the show, it's tootallsportspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the other side. Too tall.
Going crazy.
All right, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is a former sports journalist for 33 years at the Providence Journal. He spent 22 of those years covering Boston sports, primarily the Red Sox. He played his college baseball at Columbia University and started a nonprofit recently for writing workshops called Nudging the Imagination. And one of the best things he has is a vote for the Baseball Hall of Fame. So I definitely want to get into that with him. He's Steve Krasner. What's up, Steve? Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. No, I definitely got a lot of stuff to get to with you. You've covered a lot of cool things in your career. So, I kind of wanted to start. I actually wanted to mention, actually, before we move forward, is you've written a couple children's books on baseball, which we'll get into a little bit later. But one of them was called "Play Baseball Like the Pros" and "Play Ball Like a Hall of Famer." And it seems like, you've accomplished a ton in your career. So, what can you say about the last? How many, 40 years?
Well, it's amazing. And I'm sure you found this too. One thing leads to another opportunity falls into your lap. And then, because you're doing such and such. And so, I've been fortunate. I always said that I had, most people have trouble finding one career they really enjoy. And I've had 2 and now 3 and now 4, and it's just, but everything ties into my passion of writing and sports. To a large degree. So
Right.
I've been fortunate to be able to make a living, and even in my so-called retirement, to be able to have some fun with words and writing and helping young kids and students.
Yeah, I think that's great to give back after years of writing and all the success you've had. I think that's great because, the next generation is going to be writing those columns, pretty soon.
Well, yeah, but they're going to be, in 150 characters or less, they're going to be writing them, and
Right.
they'll be writing them on Instagram,
Right.
and who knows what,
Yeah.
and so, things change, and there are always pluses and minuses to everything.
Right. So you grew up in Rhode Island. What age did you really start loving baseball and maybe think about possibly playing in college? And when did that become like a realistic dream for you?
I always loved playing baseball. You find me in the backyard getting a stick and a rock and an acorn or whatever and just hitting and with friends in the neighborhood. We used to play with little plastic golf balls and those yellow plastic bats, not the big wiffle balls, but the small ones, and hitting acorns in the spring. And then just, if people in the neighborhood ever saw me, they would have thrown a net over me because I'd be out on my own, just throwing a ball up, hitting it, running around the bases, announcing the game to myself as I get into second base. And
Sure.
So I always had this passion for baseball. And so obviously going through Little League and then what we call Senior League and then playing in high school. And I just want to keep playing, and I thought, that you know what? Okay, so I'm not the biggest guy in the world. Okay, so I don't have the strongest arm, and so all right, so my specialties are turning the two, dropping a bunt down, beating it out, um, stealing a base, knowing the game. I'm sure I could get drafted. Well, apparently it was before expansion. Nobody wanted a 5'8", 125-pound second baseman
Sure.
when I
Yeah.
got out of college. And that's true. That's what I weighed
Sure.
on a heavy day. And so, but fortunately, as I say to kids in the classroom, because I could write, I ended up spending 33 years getting paid to watch games, and it wasn't my goal to be a sports writer. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. But the skills weren't good enough. But beyond college, I played in amateur leagues. I had my own team in amateur league baseball, and then it became senior type leagues, over 30, over 40, over 50. So I just kept playing, and I have a passion for the sport.
For sure. And I wanted to see you ended up deciding to go to Columbia. I mean, there's a ton of great schools in the Northeast. Obviously, that's one of the best academic schools in the country, Ivy
Right.
League. Did baseball drive that decision to go to Columbia, or is it more based on academics?
Well, it was. I applied to 5 schools when I got as I was leaving high school: University of Rhode Island, Syracuse University, and then Brown, Harvard, and Columbia. And my baseball coach wrote letters to the coaches of each of those schools. Syracuse dropped baseball, so that was going to be out. It actually was where my brother was going to school, but that was a good journalism,
Yeah.
and I knew that was maybe something I might want to do.
Yeah.
And then Brown, Columbia, and Harvard each put me on the waiting list at the same time. Columbia was the only one they actually sent someone, an alum, to watch me work out. And I don't know if they saw a game, So when Columbia accepted me, off I went.
Nice.
It was an opportunity to play some ball and obviously get a good education.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was going to ask you about your time at Columbia in the mid 70s. How would you describe, being on campus there and just the school vibe and everything, like as
Right.
far as the student experience?
I mean, I graduated in 71. So 68 was when they occupied the president's office, and there was the big uproar. My first year, I graduated high school in 71. So I was there 71, 72. In the spring of 72, there was the bombing of the ports in Haiphong. It was in all the papers. You'd have to go back and look. It was in all the papers. But anyway, it happened to be a nice spring night. Columbia is in essence, a gated community, from 110th to 106th to 120th, 114th to 120th, and then Broadway in Amsterdam, and the gates all around it. So there's a big sundial in the middle of it.
Okay.
So everybody gathered around the sundial on this beautiful day, and so all of a sudden it became student protests again because we were Columbia. So that freshman year, we actually ended up taking some classes off campus in professors' apartments because the school kind of closed down. It was a politically active campus.
Okay.
And so, but we still played baseball.
Yeah, and I saw you not only played baseball, but you were, I believe, the sports editor of the Columbia Daily Spectator. How did you have time to do that and play baseball? And how did you know you wanted to start writing also? So I guess 2-part there. Well,
I think the writing just came about in high school. I was the sports editor of the high school paper as well. And I'm sure I learned to read by reading the sports section. Back in the days, the papers were really wide and big, and so I can remember laying the paper down on our family room floor and kneeling in the middle of it so I could go over the box scores and and see what was what. So, and I like to read sports books. I don't know if you remember an author by the name of Matt Christopher, but he wrote a whole bunch of easy to read type books. When I was younger. I devoured those, all sports. And so, that just kind of continued. But there will be times we had very few people. It was a daily newspaper. We didn't have a huge staff. So there'll be times I had one other guy who was available on a certain day, and there was a tennis match going on and there was a baseball game going on. Well, all right, I'm going to be at the baseball game anyway. I'll write about the baseball game. You go do the tennis match, so I'd be hanging, be making a pitching change, and I'd be hanging at second base, and thinking, all right, how am I going to lead this story? What am I going to write about this one?
So
Not
when you were
ideal.
writing, did you ever have a bad game when you were writing your own columns?
Yeah, and I always put myself in a bad light. I
Right?
mean, I was one of those kind of guys,
Yeah.
you either do one or the other, right? I was one of the guys, after Krasner struck out, I mean,
Or Krasner went 0 for 4 today, but he did have 4 line drive hard hit balls. So he's really
that's
hitting
right. He was
hitting the ball
robbed
well.
every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, so my size, right? 2 things. We had an equipment guy, Wyatt, and our field, we had to take a subway to get to our field. It wasn't like the field was on campus. And we took the subway to the field, and it was the Harlem River ran from right field line to the left field line. So the field itself, the dimensions were like 680 down the right field line, 720 down the left field line, and 250 to dead center. I mean, that was the kind of field it was, right?
Yeah.
But there was wind off the rivers. So the equipment guy would call me heavyweight. And one day he put 2 bricks in my locker. He said, "Hey, heavyweight, better put those in your pocket. It's windy out there today."
Yeah.
So another time we had, I mean, as a college baseball program in the mid 70s, we would have crowds of about 6, 7,
Yeah.
But we had the radio station would do it every now and then. And the
Okay.
radio station wasn't that far away from the backstop, from the catcher. So I remember digging in one time and the announcer said, "This is a home game." And the announcer said, "All right, here comes Steve Krasner, Columbia's scrawny second baseman." Scrawny second. This is the home team.
Right.
So
Nice guys.
It was just, and it was actually in the era where the transition was being made from wood bats to aluminum bats.
Okay.
So they were the very first varieties of aluminum bats, and the tops would fly off, and little stuffings would fall out, and it was interesting, and we weren't very good.
Wow.
We weren't very good.
I wouldn't say Columbia is a top baseball program. So
It became better. Well, now
Yeah.
it is. Now they have a good program. They really do.
nice.
But back then it was the Eastern League. It was the Ivy League schools plus Army and Navy.
Okay.
It was the Eastern Intercollegiate Baseball League at the time.
Oh wow. Well, they've come a long way.
We'd go to Florida every spring and play some of the powerhouses. Rollins College, Florida Southern. We won one game. We won one game against a real Florida team. Sometimes we play teams, they take those 3-day bus rides down. Lafayette would come down right off the bus. Come on, let's play.
Right.
And we'd win a couple of those games. The only game we won, we beat Florida Southern one time, and yours truly had the game-winning hit.
There you go.
Now, yeah, but if I were truthful, the game-winning hit was an inside fastball that I was looking curveball outside because the count was such that it was a right-handed pitcher. I was looking curveball.
Yeah.
And it was a fastball inside. And I went, "Ugh!" And gave it the old, and the ball went dribbling over the second baseman's head. And I don't even think it dented the grass when it landed, but it was a base hit and the winning run scored.
I bet you wrote a good column after that one.
I may have sprinkled it in.
There you go. Yeah. Line drive sounds right. I wanted to ask you so you graduated from Columbia. How did you make the move to Providence Journal?
I applied to like 150 newspapers around the country.
Oh, wow.
Because I had a lot of clips to show. And it just so happened that my hometown paper actually hired me for 3 weeks. And then 3 weeks became 4, which became 5. And then, I kept appearing on the schedule. Nobody was saying anything to me, and I wasn't going to say anything.
Sure.
Until finally, at the end of the summer, they placed me on waivers and gave me my unconditional release. Okay.
Yeah.
So I had been a summertime employee full time, but so they placed me on waivers. I got released, sold toys at a department store for Christmas season, and got rehired as a free agent the following January when they needed someone in the department. I'd been there, and so next thing you know, I was hired, and I was there until that was the January of 76, and I was there until I took a buyout basically in September 08.
Wow, that's a long time to be at one paper.
It is, it is, and everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what career they're in, they reach a stage where they start to assess, well, is this it? Do I want to go elsewhere? Do I want to, and you start to make the list, stay, go, and it made more sense to stay. Eventually I knew I'd get to cover Major League Baseball, but also this is the home area and I got to play amateur league. I could switch assignments. I could still play. So I stayed.
Not a bad gig, yeah. And speaking of covering Major League Baseball, you got to do that in one of the big events covering the Boston Red Sox, of course. The first big one was the 1986 World Series, of course, the famous Bill Buckner era that led to the Mets eventually winning it all. But I know you have a different perspective of how that series really went, and so I wanted to for you to tell my listeners what you remember about how that series really played out with the Mets ended up winning the World Series, but what happened toward the end of that series?
Yeah, and Buckner. Game 6, Red Sox, if they win the World Series for the first time in 1,000 years, okay? So we had 3 people there from the Providence Journal. Someone was writing a game story, someone was writing a column, and then there was me. I was to grab some notes here and there, write a post-game sidebar, a pre-game sidebar, a little of this, a little of that. So it was a Saturday night. There were deadlines. This is back in way before the internet, when everything was 24/7.
Right.
And a Saturday night deadlines were always tight. They were always earlier because the papers were larger and there were fewer editions printed. And so anyway, bottom line is when the ball went through Buckner's legs, even though I was pretty fast at writing, there was no time for me to write a sidebar, nor was there an opportunity to put it in the paper because the Sunday paper was being printed and they were going to stop it, what they call on the run, so that as the stories get in, they stop the press run and found a way to shoehorn those stories in and then continue the press run. So that gave me, so there are a couple of things about that, as you mentioned. So that gave me opportunity to be in the locker room post game. Everyone else is feverishly rewriting their stories. It looked like the Red Sox were going to win the first World Series since 1918. And the next thing you know, they lost, and there's game 7 coming up tomorrow. And so I was one of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 people, that's all, post game, as I recall, surrounding Buckner after the game. And, about his era. And what his era had done, I mean, the Red Sox had the lead, and the Mets ended up coming back with 3 runs in the bottom of the inning and beat him. And the last run came in on Mookie Wilson's relatively slow ground ball up the first base line that sneaked its way through Bill Buckner's bow legs. Okay. Right. So what Buckner did was he always had this big mustache and a goofy smile on his face. So he reached on top of his locker and pulled out a pair of sunglasses. And he said to us, I probably should put these on because I don't think Red Sox fans are too happy with me right now. He said, but you know what? Hey, if play as many games as I have, people make errors. It's part of the game. It's okay. We'll go get them in game 7. And I've always felt that Bill Buckner was unfairly blamed. He was the GOAT. I mean, they lost the World Series because of Bill Buckner. But the fact of the matter is, couple of things conspired against him because it was a late Saturday night. And as I said earlier, very few people in our area got a final game story in their paper when they picked it up Sunday morning. So the process, what you would do as a sports writer is you would write that game story again for Monday's paper with a different angle to it. Okay. Because obviously everyone already kind of knew the hits, runs, and errors, but a different angle to it. What we'd call the second day story.
Okay.
So that was going to be there in the next day's paper, Monday's paper. Now, had they played game 7 on Sunday, there would have been a gazillion stories about someone would have won the World Series, someone would have lost. There would have been a blown call or a home run or a pitching change or whatever. There's all sorts of stories. And by the way, on page D13, here's the story about game 6 and the Red Sox lost. Okay. But game 7, which was a Sunday, got rained out. So therefore, there were no game stories to write. There was nobody won, nobody lost. And that to me is why a major focus fell on Bill Buckner and his era. Because the Red Sox, once they did play game 7 on the Monday, the Red Sox had the lead in that game and lost. And Buckner had nothing to do with losing that game. It was the bullpen, the relief pitchers who came in and Strawberry's home run off Al Nipper. And so, there was a lot of stuff and Buckner had nothing to do with it. And yet he was always considered the reason they didn't win the World Series. Now, keeping in mind that had he made the play on Mookie Wilson's ground ball, It's not as if the Red Sox would have won the World Series right then and there. The game was tied. And they lost. Now, obviously, they lost all chance of winning when the ball went through his legs. But had he made the play, they would have gone to the next extra inning. They
Wow.
would have been tied, and they would have gone to the next inning. And who knows what would have happened. But
Nobody talks
to me,
about
he
that.
was always unfairly vilified.
Yeah, definitely. And that's crazy about the rain out, how it would have been the next day. It's, can't worry about it. Game 7, here we go. So
Right.
that is a wild, I'm glad you told that story, because not many people know about that part of the story.
Yeah.
And before we get back to the Red Sox, I want to ask you covered the 1989 World Series, the famous earthquake that, no pun intended, rocked the Oakland A's and San Francisco Giants back in that World Series. What was that like covering that series for you?
Well, my wife's family is in Southern California. So I'd been through some minor earthquakes. Now, again, there was a 3-hour time difference. So because of that, it wasn't like my newspaper in Providence could wait for the game to be over for me to then write a story and put it in the paper. So the process is you write an early story. Okay. So you write a story that's going to hold that space in the newspaper until you can write a live story off the game. And it so happened, the story I had written as the early story was Fay Vincent was the commissioner. He had taken over from Bart Giamatti when Giamatti had passed away. And he was talking about the state of the game, and and everyone was talking about him, and he's doing an okay job. What happens when something big happens? How's he going to react? So anyway, that was my early story. So the process was, and this is obviously back in the Neanderthal days of portable computer terminals. Okay. So the process would be you'd write your story and you'd send it in over the phone wires, and then you would call the office to find out, did you get it? Was there any garble in the story? Does it end where it's supposed to end? Because there could have been an electrical storm in Dayton, Ohio that would wreck the transmission somehow, some way, for whatever reason. So I was on the phone to the office. I was in the third row, which was the back row in Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And I was on the phone, and I had never been to Candlestick Park. I had trouble finding my way in. So I'm there and I'm calling. All of a sudden, I can feel the ground moving. And in my mind, I'm thinking, having an earthquake. So what? I've been through some. It's no big deal. And then, as I'm talking in the office, there are people, San Francisco writers, local writers, sitting in the front row in front of these big plate glass windows. And all of a sudden, they jumped out of their chairs and they ran past me and out of the press box. So I remember saying into the phone, I said, geez, what happened? An earthquake? Goodbye. And I hung up the phone. And then I didn't know where to go. I mean, we don't have earthquake preparedness here in Rhode Island. We had what we call duck and cover, which goes back to the, World War II days, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then it stopped. Okay. It subsided. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's nice and still. So I called the office and they said, what happened? Because if you're watching, they're doing pregame and then poof, nothing, just the fuzz, right?
Right.
So I said, well, so I told them what I had seen. And so they had me talk to news writers. Well, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? And at the end of it, I said, listen, do me a favor, call my wife, because just to let her know in case she's watching, we got 3 little kids at home. I'm okay. I'm fine. Okay. So now I hang up the phone and I have a job to do. There's no game, but I'm a reporter. It so happens my specialty, my content area is sports, but a reporter is a reporter, a journalist is a journalist. Okay. So now I need to go find information. I need to find Red Sox people, who happen to be there. Where were you? What did you see? What did you feel? Right. So I'm on the field, I'm in the clubhouse, no one knows what's going on or what's going to happen afterwards, whatever. Gathering as much information as I can in interviews, because, as we talked off air, when you're a journalist and a sports writer, you lose the fan in you got a job to do. So everything else becomes peripheral. You got work to do, just because there's no game doesn't mean you don't have stories to write. You don't have the night off. So I'm finding stuff. And then it's starting to get becoming dusk out there. Because it was, if I'm not mistaken, 5:07 p.m., I think it was nighttime in California time.
Okay.
And there's no power. Okay. And so I ended up hopping on a bus to take us from Candlestick Park into San Francisco. And I had a credential hanging around my neck, which had my name, not a picture, just a name. Stephen Krasner, Providence Journal. So I'm hanging on. I got all my stuff with me. I'm hanging on. And there's a guy sitting there, and he looks at my tag, and he looks up at me, and he says, "Hey, I know you. You know me. How can you possibly know me? I'm in San Francisco." Turned out he was an assistant manager of a Dunkin' Donuts store in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, which is just over the line, and they get the Providence Journal. It's part of our circulation area. So what did I do? I interviewed him. Where were you? What did you hear? What did whatever. So now we get to the bus drops us off. I'm sure you've heard the expression, it's so dark you can't see 2 inches in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
That's what it was. I don't know if you know San Francisco, we get dropped off in Market Street. The hotel headquarters was in San Francisco, and so I had to walk a decent distance. And Market Street is a shady area. A lot of homeless people in Market Street. So I'm walking, and I'm hearing people asking me for money. I don't see them. I hear the voice first before they're right in front of me, and it's kind of scary. But I make it to the hotel headquarters. They've got emergency lighting and power and whatever, so I can type my stories. And at the time, one of the TV stations here in locally in Rhode Island wanted to talk to me. So after I'm done working, sending in my stories, I call them up, and they're interviewing me like I'm a war correspondent. Like you see the picture of my voice over the crackling phone. That was me. And so, but then now I start to go up to my room. I mean, I had stuff, and it was a hike, 12 floors or whatever, right? Emergency lighting in the hallways. When I get to my room, the lamps are on their heads, and I get in bed, and now is when I start to think, what could happen? You start to hear about the fires in the Marina District. You start to hear about the collapsed freeway, one deck on top of the other, right? And so I'm thinking, geez, I mean, it could have been, what could have happened, And so, and is the bed moving? Are we having an aftershock? Do I need to get out of here? I mean, it was unsettling. So, we spent a bunch of time in San Francisco, and then they announced they were going to resume the series. I actually came home, flew all the way home for 2 days, and then went back again. I just needed to get away because it was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But I finished the series. Some people never went back. So that was a memorable, experience. I think when you cover sports as long as I did, by accident, you're going to be at major events.
Oh, for sure.
And that was a pretty major event. That was number one on my storytelling. I mean, I have stories, as you do from your years, in professional sports. And that's one of my major stories.
That's a great one. Definitely. It's not great that it happened, but cool that you got to be a part of that. I did have a random question about writing, and like that old expression, "stop the presses." Is that what that means when you really stop the movement? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's exactly what it was. When in the '86 World Series, is whoa, wait a minute, we got Bill Perillo's column in here. Whoa, stop. And obviously the process was very different. Now it's more automated. I mean, things are a lot.
You can email your story now versus calling it in or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, many's the time, you'd have to dictate, and because the computer glitch or whatever reason, something wasn't working, and you still have to get a story in. There's no. I remember one time covering a college hockey game, and we had just started with these so-called portable terminals that weighed like 4,000 pounds each.
Right.
And I'm typing in my story. I'm just at the point where I need to send it because it's getting late, and I hit the button, and the screen freezes. So, and I'm not a tech guy. I knew enough I wasn't going to do anything. So I called the tech people at the office.
Sure.
I said, listen, this is what happened. And the guy said to me, well, why don't you try turning it on and off? And I said to him, no, I don't want to try anything. I don't want to try something, have it go poof.
Right.
Tell me what to do. No, you should be fine. Turn it on and off. You're good. On, off, poof, done.
Gone.
So then I was like trying to recreate and dictating to someone who couldn't understand. It was
so what happens when you did you ever not get a story in? Like, what do they do with that space in the paper?
No.
Okay. So you were
not get a story in. I mean, I never did. I was pretty reliable in terms of getting stories in a deadline. And in fact, if I said, listen, can I push, they would say, we need the story by such and such time to get it, done and whatever. I said, listen, something's happened. Can you give me another 5 minutes? And knowing me, because I was relatively clean when they would go over my copy. Okay, because they knew I wouldn't take advantage and say,
Right.
make that 5 minutes and turn it into 20, which causes problems on their end.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, over time, you build trust.
No, that's great. That's good. I'd say probably the biggest event for you, maybe arguably in the last, 100 and so many years, is when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004. You were covering the series. What do you remember about, of course, they had the big run. They beat the Yankees in the ALCS, and then they go on to win it all.
Yeah.
What was that like for you in 04?
Well, my son, I was able to buy tickets for game 1 of the World Series. So my son was there, and he ended up playing college baseball as well. So he was there with a buddy, and he was in college at the time, if I'm not mistaken. He was in college. And I saw him before the game, and I said to the two of them, I said, this is a sweep. There's no way the Cardinals can win a game. The momentums of the Red Sox, and the Cardinals were beaten up. They had no pitching for some reason. I don't remember the details, but I just remember they had nothing left.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be a sweep. Well, the first game was an ugly game. There were like 18 errors or something in that game. It was terrible, but the Red Sox won. So now we go to St. Louis, right, for game 3 and 4. They win game 3. Okay, it's done. I mean, there's no way the Cardinals are going to win 4 straight, right? So I'm in bed. By the time you finish working, game 3, by the time you get to bed, it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever, And I keep waking up thinking, because I know they're going to win. I need to remember to put this in. I need to remember, so-and-so was president when they last won. I got to put in, this and that, right? So I get up in the morning, like it's 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and I write the story as if the Red Sox have just won the World Series for the first time since in 86 years it was, right? Everything's there except the 2 paragraphs worth of what the final score was and how they got the runs. Right. Because that was nowhere nearly as important in the game story as the overview that they won for the first time in 86 years.
Yes.
Okay? So I got to the ballpark, like maybe 4 or 5 hours before the game. It's normal. And I called the office, because you always call the office. How much do you want? When do you need it? That kind of thing. And the sports editor said, well, you've got the game story. I said, no, don't worry about that, Arthur. It's done. He said, what do you mean it's done? The first pitch isn't for another 4 hours. So I said, no, it's done. The Red Sox are going to win this world. I've already written the story. Just don't worry about that. What else you want me to do? It was the first time and only time I wrote a game story
before the game was over.
10 hours before the first pitch or whatever.
So that's, especially for Red Sox people, that's a bad omen right there. They haven't won in 86 years.
No, you just knew it was a done deal.
Yeah.
And the thing was, even if it didn't happen in game 4, it would have had, that story would have gone for game 5 or game 6 or game 7. At some point it was going to be used, because the overview of it all was going to work. But I actually wrote that game story, at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Crazy. So obviously, it was, great covering that, and it was a big deal for the city.
It was great, but you know what? As I said to you, you lose the fan in you. I said off air, you lose the fan in you when you're working, because it's all about you. What's your deadline? Who's going to be able to talk when? And how slow is the elevator to get you down there? And what's the deadline? And especially if a team loses, like in 2003. When they lost game 7 to the Yankees, despite having a 5-2 lead with Pedro on the mound. And so, even if you get in the locker room, who's going to be there to talk to you? The 5th string catcher, and who cares? No offense to that 5th string catcher. He got a lot further than I did in pro ball. But so all these things, I kind of regret to some degree not appreciating, if you will, the moments I was part of, and letting it sink in and savoring it and remembering so many details, because I was too concerned with, well, what's my next story? And maybe I can do an extra story on this, or I saw this happen, and that would be a nice little sidebar. And so it's not like you're sitting in your lounge chair at home watching the game.
Right. No, you had a job to do. You're working too.
It's a good job. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, sure.
It's a great job.
Sure.
But we also had situation. I remember a friend of mine from Milwaukee, Tom Hodricourt, as they were getting ready to play game 4, he looked down and he said, I pity you Boston scribes, because there's no way you can do this justice, no matter how you write it.
Yeah, it's true.
It was monumental.
Definitely.
And I'll say one other thing about that story.
Sure.
And I use this all the time when I'm talking writing with my college freshmen classes I've taught, and all the time I use this. Writing is not formulaic. There's everything you write has its own personality to some degree. What you can do with one, you can't do with another. And it's all about purpose and audience, right? So my first paragraph for that story, when they beat St. Louis in 2004, I wrote a one-word first paragraph. What do you think it was?
I don't know.
Finally.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you didn't know sports or the Red Sox and you picked it up, you said, what is he talking about? But I don't care about you because I'm not writing for you.
Right.
Everybody knew exactly what that meant. I mean, obviously right after who, what, when, where, why, and all that stuff. But I mean.
That's all you needed.
That's all I needed.
It encapsulated the whole thing, man. It was totally.
Yeah.
And speaking of your columns, I wanted to ask you about, you naturally get letters to the editor, and I know you have a good story about that. So when you write a column, what happens when you get certain reactions?
Well, the one thing you realize is that there is no tone of voice in the newspaper. The reader tends to supply his or her own voice. Okay. Yeah. So the example I always give is that I remember writing covering a Red Sox Yankee game. And I remember getting 2 letters after my game story appeared. One of the letter writers said, well, clearly you're a Red Sox fan. I can tell just by the way you wrote this story. And the other letter was from a Yankee fan. It said, clearly you're a Red Sox fan. I can tell just by the story. You shouldn't let your bias shine through. And so same game, same story, and viewed different ways because the reader fills in his or her own. They're just flat words for the most part. I mean, you're not there seeing expression. You're trying to do your best, when you're writing it, trying to be objective, certainly in a game story. And so, but it was just kind of interesting that was the take on that particular story. I don't remember what the story was, but I do remember the fact that there were differing opinions about the same story.
Yes, I know. It's crazy how that can happen, right? You're just writing words and people interpret it how they want, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So obviously you played baseball in college, which probably helped you when you became a reporter and not just, geeky fan, reporter guy. So I know you mentioned off the air that the players respected you a little bit more because you would ask more fundamental questions about the game, and they kind of respected your knowledge of the game. What do you remember about that part of your interview process?
Over time that happened, so it started to work that way, grow that way when I would cover the Pawtucket Red Sox, the AAA farm club of the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah.
And as those players, you develop trust, or you get to know some players a little better than others, and it's just personality kind of thing. And if you develop trust with them, well, then they move to Boston. They move up to Boston, and I moved up to Boston, around the same time,
Yeah.
And that core of players of Bruce Hurst and Wade Boggs and Marty Barrett and, and Bob Ojeda and John Tudor and, a whole bunch of the same guys, the Rich Gedman, all those guys were kind of going up around the same time. And so with them, they kind of knew that I knew the game a little bit, the manager of Pawtucket, Joe Morgan, even let me shag flies during batting practice at times. So once I got to the big league clubhouse, that word kind of spread because much like the media will talk about the players, I'll talk to that guy, he's a pain in the, I mean, they talk about players too, to the point the players talk about the writers.
Right.
Too. And there was one time, Tim Wakefield, whom I'd known for a long time, at one point he called me over and said, hey, Kras, come here. What do you want? See that guy over there? He was talking to a writer from one of the papers. He's a bad guy. He keeps trying to get me to say things that, that's when you have trust.
For sure. They're calling you over to vent about another writer. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So that kind of spread so that when I would ask a question, and I would like to do it one-on-one, it kind of like educate me here. Why would you not take that second base, and why would you go up the middle? Why would you not take that one extra step and get in front of the ball instead of backhanding the ball? And they wouldn't take it as second guessing from me, as someone else might ask the very same question and get a totally different response because they didn't know the guy, they didn't trust him, and like you could play, you know what I mean? And so I found even managers that work with me, especially with Jimmy Williams, it was kind of like, educate me. Why put the bunt on the first pitch, take it off on the second pitch and third pitch, and put it back on the fourth pitch?
Right.
Educate me, because I knew it. I learned early on covering Pawtucket Red Sox. Joe Morgan was their manager. He ended up managing Boston as well.
Okay.
Not the Joe Morgan who played for Cincinnati.
Right. I was like, not that Joe Morgan.
No. Walpole Joe from Walpole,
Okay.
Massachusetts. Down to earth and as small an ego as you could possibly have in that job.
Right.
And I remember him saying to me a couple of things. One, I was watching them take infield outfield practice back in the day when they did. Someone hit the ball to the right field. He threw the ball in. He said, "What do you think of that guy's arm?" So I watched a couple. Pretty good. Terrible. He didn't say terrible. He had another word for it, but he said, "No, watch the way he throws it. Watch how his elbow is. Watch," you know what I'm saying? So he helped teach me some things. And then there was a game where the situation screamed for the right-handed hitter he had on his bench to pinch hit in the ninth inning in a key spot. And he didn't go for him. He left the left-hander in, whatever. He got eaten up, whatever. Why would you not pinch hit that guy? And he gave me an honest answer. He said, "I couldn't. That guy's scared stiff of that pitcher because last year he hit him in his hands. He was never the same. And he's, I can't put him in the lineup against that guy." Made me realize that there's always a reason for doing something. They may not explain or want to explain the reason to the media, but they didn't just fall off the turnip truck. They didn't just, "Oh, geez, wait a minute. How many outs were there? I forgot." There's always a reason for doing what they did.
Right. And maybe something you see could seem like the right thing to do, but maybe it's just who's been hot lately. There's a history there, like you said. There's a lot of reasons not to make moves, and that's obviously before analytics. That's just purely gut feeling there.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's making the decision. And again, as far as decisions go, I'll look back to that 2003 Yankee Red Sox Game 7 playoff game, ALCS, when Grady Little, who was the Red Sox manager, stuck with Pedro Martinez in the eighth inning. When it was clear in the seventh inning, he had run out of gas. He got out of it. He had but they were like rockets, they were hitting. And he had a bullpen that had been lights out in the postseason at that point.
Yeah.
And so he left him in from 5-2 lead. Yankees ended up tying it and winning the game on Aaron Boone's home run in the 11th inning.
Right.
Okay. So Grady Little was scorched. Okay. And one of the things he said has always stuck with me. He said, "It's not the decision. It's the results of the decision."
Yeah.
And that's what it all comes down to.
Sure.
And oftentimes if you listen to sportscasters or whatever, "Oh, he made such a great play. It was a good call here to go for it, fourth down, Yeah. But if he doesn't make it, if he slips in the backfield, what a stupid call that was. Why would he do that?
Right.
Why don't you just punt the ball?
Right.
There's
always that.
It was like, the Packers took a field goal instead of
going for it.
Right. Because he trusted his defense to stop him. And he had stopped him, but they threw the flag.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's pass interference where it hasn't been pass interference all game.
Yeah.
And so it's the results of the decisions.
Definitely.
That, but Grady Little lost his job next day.
And speaking of, before I get on to the really juicy part of this phenomenal interview that we have here, you got to obviously cover Terry Francona, Tito.
I did.
And I wanted to see, I've heard great things about him. He's a player's guy, but he's just he's just like the perfect mix of what a manager should be. What is your experience covering Terry Francona?
Yeah, well, again, there's always in Boston and Philly and New York, there's always kind of an adversarial relationship, if you will, with some media members, and and everybody's guarded about what they say and how they say things. But I always found him to be affable enough so that when you knew he was feeding you a line of baloney, you just said to yourself, well, the general manager doesn't want, for instance, when he would say, "Oh, you guys don't know Manny Ramirez. He's in here early getting treatment and getting work even before you guys get here." Well, it's a load of baloney, right? But cut him some slack because the general manager doesn't want him saying it. So all right, so
he's covering for his players.
So to some degree, he would get the benefit of the doubt because he wasn't condescending necessarily. He was. And he was a manager that you could just pop into his office and say, why didn't you bunt on that play? And get a baseball answer.
Yeah. And he won a lot, so it's hard to say no, to
He
him after
did.
a while.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
he did. But being in the business that managers have a shelf life.
Right.
And it's kind of cyclical, so that you get a player's manager, and then they start to take advantage of them, like beer and chicken wings, and that was the end of Terry Francona.
Right.
Okay? So now we need to bring in a guy who's a hard guy, a tough guy, Bobby Valentine. That went over
that didn't go so well.
And then all right, get rid of him, and now we bring in Alex Cora,
Right.
And so or whomever.
I think it was like John Farrell, then Cora.
Right. So
I agree, though. It has that opposite guy. Yeah.
But the players do all too often run the asylum. It's the players running the asylum.
Yeah, it's a players' league.
So you have to hope that the players you have, are the Derek Jeters of the world,
right,
or the Dustin Pedroias, because guys, people ask me all the time, who are your favorite players, right? My favorite players are the guys who play hard just for the game, respect the game. You could pay him $1.50 an hour, like a Kirby Puckett or a Jeter or a Pedroia, and they're going to play the same way, because it's not, oh, look at me, look what I did.
Right.
It's all about the team. It's all about and you form opinions about players, like Derek Jeter, for instance. I don't remember what year it was, but there was a year in which it was like mid to late May, third week in May, and Red Sox were playing in Yankee Stadium. And Jeter was hitting like 210, and really struggling, and yet there he was at his locker after the games. I remember after the first game, it was another over, but the Yankees won. And there he was saying, hey, listen, there's no sugarcoating it. I'm hitting whatever I'm hitting, but I'll most guys would be hiding in the trainer's room or in the lounges that they have now, because it's easy to be, the guy, oh yeah, come on, come around. I got things to say. Yeah, sure. You just hit 2 home runs, but when you make that game losing error, or you're hitting 210 and you're not, it's still about the team, it says a lot.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, definitely.
Human nature is to want to go hide.
Yes.
But when you're a captain,
you got to face it.
Jim Rice.
Yeah.
Was the most intimidating guy I ever met, because it was when I first started writing.
Yeah.
He'd sit, in his locker like this, his arms folded, and look at you if you started to walk over him, as if to say, don't even try it. I'm telling you, I'll stuff you in a trash can. And he did that to a Washington writer. Washington Post.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yet, he was one of those guys where he was not a good fielder. But if he hit 2 home runs, you may not find him. Because in his mind, well, that's what I'm paid to do. I'm supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But if he made an error, lost the game, there he was at his locker.
Yeah.
You got to respect that.
For sure. Definitely. And obviously you got to cover great players like Jeter and among tons of other players. You were one of the lucky ones to get a Hall of Fame vote, and you've told me that you had it since the mid 90s. How do you even get a Hall of Fame vote? What's the process for that?
You have to have covered a major league team, home and away for the most part, for 10 consecutive years.
Okay.
And that's when you automatically get the vote.
Oh, so there's a lot of people that have votes then, just because of that?
Well,
do they get taken away if you stop covering the team, or is it like a lifetime thing?
No. Well, at the time when I got it, the rules were you had it for life. Okay. But then they shortened it to 10 years after you're done covering. Right.
Okay.
And on the theory that, you get old doddering people, and I'm starting to fall into that category, get off my lawn.
Uh-huh.
But, say so-and-so couldn't, they covered Mickey Mantle in his prime, he couldn't hold his jock strap, what I mean?
Yeah. They
so,
lose touch with the game.
A little bit, because the game changes,
Right.
And with me, the players that are coming up for vote now, those are guys that I all covered. I covered all of them,
right.
So it's right in my wheelhouse, so to speak, and the steroid era and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. That's a huge one of the, as I said earlier, the juicy part of the conversation. But do you find it odd that nobody was elected to the Hall of Fame this year?
I don't.
Is that bad for baseball, you think?
No, I think it's one of the great things about baseball, if you look at it that way. Why put someone in just to put someone in? I mean, if you feel, you have, um, everyone in there, and you can argue merits of certain players, right, in different
Yeah.
areas and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you want the best of the best. It's not the whole of the very, very good. So if you don't feel as a voter that when you mention the guy's name, automatically you say Pedro Martinez, yeah, he's in. I mean,
Right.
you don't even have to think about it. Never mind the statistic. You don't have to look that up. He's in. If there's no one that you feel is worthy of joining Hank Aaron and all the greats that are there, then you shouldn't be voting for them.
I think that's a good point. No, I respect that because I agree with you. It's supposed to be an exclusive club, not just this guy put his time in. It's his turn. He's going
right,
in. Yeah.
right, exactly.
And speaking of that, so I wanted to get to kind of since you're willing to say who you voted for and did not vote for. Obviously, a couple guys that were up for it were controversial, like Clemens and Barry Bonds, and then also Curt Schilling was a hot item of why he didn't get in. First of all, I know you did. You told me you did vote for Bonds and Bonds and Clemens, so I wanted to hear what your argument is for those guys.
Yeah, and I do that, and I have throughout, and I do that because, and not everybody agrees with me. Because in my mind, before they were linked to steroids, they were Hall of Fame baseball players. I mean, Bonds had several MVPs. Clemens had several Cy Youngs. I mean, they were dominant. I mean, Bonds was not just a hitter. He was a stolen base guy. He was a Gold Glove winner. I mean, he was, and Clemens was just, I mean, every game I covered, it was like, is this the game he pitches a no-hitter? And so, I mean, he was dominant.
Right. I would agree with you, but how do you feel about their numbers once you don't even know when they started, really? You could guess, but how do you feel about their numbers after they were using? Is that fair to you?
Well, I understand the argument, but to me, it's almost irrelevant because they were Hall of Fame. If their careers ended, if Clemens' career ended before going to Toronto, he was a Hall of Famer. If Bond's career ended before, I don't remember when he went to San Francisco. Yeah. I don't remember that as well, but he's still a Hall of Fame baseball player. So after that, I can kind of overlook and say it doesn't matter. Whatever those numbers are, doesn't make any difference to me.
So now, maybe the thinking is they were the best of that era that was allowing steroids?
Well, because my criteria was before steroids, what they were.
Right.
Of the steroid era, yeah. But again, I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, look at it this way. Jose Canseco was blasted when he said, I forget what percentage he said used steroids, 35%, 40, whatever it was.
Yeah.
He was underselling it,
Yeah.
I mean, as you come to find out, over time.
Right.
And so the best players are still going to be the best players. But the difference is someone like Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. Okay.
Yeah.
To me, those two guys were one-dimensional players, and that one dimension was greatly aided by steroid use.
Yes.
So to me, they were more like Dave Kingman, who played for a lot of teams. I think he had over 400 home runs, and usually 300 home runs, or certainly 400 was an automatic ticket into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
But I mean, he was a terrible fielder. I mean, he was didn't hit for average. I mean, he was just a home run hitter. I mean, he knew launch angle before these guys, before launch angle became a thing. And so to me, I never voted for them for that reason.
And that's fair. I'm with you on that. I did want to get to Schilling, though, because in my opinion, I did look at it. We both looked at his numbers and all that stuff. And I know he's got character issues off the field, which doesn't help his case because it's got writers are voting, right? Not players voting.
Well, but there's also the clause in the, the voting, sportsmanship and all that kind of stuff. But, and then people say, well, yeah, but Ty Cobb was I mean, and so he was a racist and how did he, well,
They try to separate real life from baseball, right? So if we're looking on the field, I just wanted to read you a couple numbers and see what your reaction is. So he did have 216 wins, which is a lot compared to most pitchers that pitched as long as he did. 6 All-Stars. He led the league in strikeouts twice. He kind of did well during the steroid era, if you can give him credit for that. The weird one is, and I know this is a newer stat, but the WAR, the wins above replacement, He had a higher WAR than Tom Glavine, who's in the Hall of Fame, and he was just underneath Bob Gibson, also in the Hall of Fame. So how do you quantify, and his postseason numbers? I got more for you here, Steve. His postseason numbers.
Would you look at the time? Would you look at the time?
Very funny. 11-2 with a 2.2 ERA, 3 World Series, co-MVP in the 01 World Series. How does that not say Hall of Famer?
Yeah, 216 wins, right? See, this is what's great about the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Right.
You can have these arguments. You can make numbers stand up and dance, do pirouettes if you want, And so, and to me, I think that's a great thing. So I did some research myself, So Schilling was in his regular season. Let's just go regular season for now. 216 and 146 with a 3.46 earned run average. Okay.
It's a good career.
Andy Pettitte is not in the Hall of Fame. Okay. 256 and 153. So in other words, for Schilling to catch Andy Pettitte in terms of winning percentage, he would have to go 40-7. Okay. And his earned run average was respectable at 3.85. Mike Mussina is in the Hall of Fame. It might surprise you to know he won 270 games.
I am surprised to hear that because I didn't think he had that.
With 153 losses, which is the same number of losses as Pettitte. So therefore, Schilling to catch him would have to go 54-7. And his earned run average is 3.68. Now, Andy Pettitte had a lot of postseason success as well.
But he also was linked to Clemens with the steroid issue or HGH.
Well, yes, but I don't think that's as much a factor with him. You're right, but I don't think it's. I mean, Clemens and Bonds and
they were automatic.
I think that there are different levels of steroid use.
Right.
So, plus he owned up to it.
Sure,
that's another thing. But and he had terrific postseason success as well. I haven't voted for him because
you haven't voted for which one? Sorry,
Pettitte.
For Pettitte. Okay.
Was he dominant? I don't know. I mean, he's the Hall of the very, very good.
Right.
Right. And to be honest with you, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember if I voted for Mussina or not. To be honest with you,
when I think of him, his career was kind of winding down as I was a little bit too young for him, but I was shocked how many wins he had. Like his name doesn't scream Hall of Fame when you think about it,
Right.
But I mean, the numbers are there. Baseball's all about sacred numbers, right? That you hit those milestones, you're in.
But numbers are changing. How do we look at them? Who was suspected of it? I mean, Bagwell and Piazza was suspected, but nobody ever said, and they're in the Hall of Fame. And who else is in the Hall of Fame that probably used? I don't know. I mean, we in the business always thought it was just a hitter's thing and not a pitcher's thing, but that, and we weren't even aware of it until after the Andros Steendione was found in McGuire's locker, and then that kind of led to it, but you just see even utility players with muscles on muscles and all sorts of different injuries started to crop up, like oblique muscles and patellas. And, I mean, the frame wasn't equipped to handle the steroid induced masses.
Right. Was there I was going to ask you, just outside of the steroid-connected guys, was there somebody or a couple guys that you think deserve to get in that haven't gotten in yet, that you've maybe pushed for that maybe have not?
Well, one guy I think that should get in, and I don't know if he will, is Omar Vizquel.
Oh, yeah.
Because to me, it shouldn't be just a home run hitters Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And he was a magician at shortstop.
One of the best, maybe the best defensive shortstop ever.
He and Roberto Alomar were just such a as a middle infielder myself.
Yeah,
they were just such a treat to watch. I would hope when the Red Sox were playing against them when they were on the Indians or the Orioles together, Indians, I guess, right?
Yeah,
that someone would get on first with nobody out, and someone would hit a ground ball. Let's see, 4-6-3, 6-4-3. It was just magic. It was just magic. And he wasn't a bad hitter either.
Right.
Now he's just come, I mean, there's been some negative publicity about him with assault charges and things like that.
Sure.
But even before that, and even in Schilling's case, before his latest pronouncements, that got a lot of negative attention, voting was already done.
Right.
It wasn't like that drove the voting. So, I mean, he's one guy that I would like to see get in. I mean, there are others, so many, not Chipper Jones, Dale Murphy, I mean, Fred McGriff,
The
you want to
crime
look at
dog.
him in
He should
different,
get in.
different
Yeah.
light. And, but a friend of mine, always has this, he would always say in one of his criteria, would you stop what you're doing to watch the guy? So for instance, if you were headed for the men's room, okay, and a guy stepped in the batter's box, would you wait? Would you hold it? you know, or is it just, well, I'll see him next at bat?
Right. I totally agree with you. Are you going to stop and watch greatness, or are you going to keep on going? Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to, now moving off the Hall of Fame for a second, about the 2 books that I mentioned. So one was Play Like the Pros and one was Play Like the Hall of Famers. What was it like to write those books, and kind of how did you go about interviewing guys that you have talked to during your career, but to get their experiences to write a children's baseball book?
Well, the whole project started with my son. As I said, he was a pretty good baseball player, played in college. He was 13 playing fall ball, and I was walking to my seat, not coaching, just there to watch a game. And all of a sudden, he was playing soft toss against the backstop. And I heard the coach say, as I'm walking past him, I heard the coach say, Jeff, hit the ball as high up on the screen as you can. And I stopped in my tracks and turned around, because you can't give a kid worse advice. The only way to hit the ball high up on the screen is to drop your back shoulder and swing up. That's terrible. So I stopped and turned around, and the coach's back was to me. And Jeff caught my eye. He knew better, but what are you going to say? It's his coach, right?
Yeah.
So, but it made me realize there are well-meaning people who give up their time, and that's fine, but bad advice is worse than none. So for 26 weeks, I volunteered, I wrote a series. I created a series for the newspaper, Providence Journal, in which major leaguers talked about different specific crafts. It was kind of a stream of consciousness. How do you lay down a sacrifice bunt? Or how do you turn the 6-4-3 double play with Cal Ripken as the shortstop, Chuck Knobloch as the second baseman? What do you do? And that turned into the book project. And we added in their memories when they were, one of the books is for kids, little league size diamond skills. And the other one for the Hall of Famers, it's for when you move to full size diamond. But when I started doing it for the Journal, and once the player realized that I kind of knew what I was talking about, when in asking certain questions and follow-up questions, they opened up. And it made me realize as a sports writer that very rarely do we ask about their craft. We're more prone to ask about their injuries, their salaries, their slumps, who's coming out of their hotel room at 4:00 in the morning, as opposed to something, as I mentioned earlier, why not get in front of the ball? Why backhand the ball?
Yeah.
And so I think they enjoyed talking about their craft. They don't become major league players by accident, as you well know.
Right.
There is something to be said for natural ability, no question. But I mean, that only gets you so far, and then you have to learn about yourself and make adjustments. It's a series of adjustments you're making. And there's a thought process between, when I would coach, I've coached Little League and I've coached some, AAU ball, and I would tell the kids, you don't play baseball, you think baseball. Why would you throw to second on that play instead of third? How fast is the runner? What's the score? What inning is it? Who's up in the batting order? Who's coming up next? And I mean, all of these things, it's a thinking game.
Yeah.
It's a chess match. Every pitch is a chess match.
Definitely.
And so in talking to these players, I get more of an insight. There's a valuable experience for me, to get their insight as to how they do things and why they do things. And so that led to the book projects.
That's great. And yeah, you're right. Because the media they want the story, right? They want eyeballs. So what are they going to ask about? Everything that has nothing to do with the fundamentals of the game. That's boring talk to some people, right? But if you can do that with them, they, like we talked about earlier, they respect you more because you have an interest in their craft.
Right. And it's not a fake interest. I really do.
It's a genuine interest.
I mean,
yeah.
I know a little bit about it, but and a working knowledge of it. But and sometimes I'd hear some different writers in the press box say something about a specific play, and I just, oh no, you just no. Or I would be offended by certain things I'd see on the field. Would you just hit the cutoff, man? How difficult is it?
Right.
Where are you throwing? Why would you throw to that? I mean, same thing as I'm saying to my Little League and AAU kids.
Right.
I mean, the fundamentals. I mean,
yeah, the simple stuff. I know.
Yeah.
That's why you got to teach it. Yeah.
It would get in the press box. When someone would do something stupid, they'd all look down at me and say, "Kras, Crass.
I wanted to ask you about, so you end up leaving the Providence Journal in '08, and you did say you did some side work for ESPN Boston once everybody kind of got in
Correct.
ESPN City during that time, the
Right.
late 2000s. What was that like toward the end of that run with Providence Journal and then kind of doing some freelance stuff?
Well, from a personal point of view, it's a great job. Okay. But it's a job, you know, and certain parts of any job are not as much fun anymore. Like you couldn't ask anybody a question, get an answer. Everybody's hiding,
Right.
and the media's all around, and nobody's talking. It's just like it's just I get tired of the routine. It's like, listen, I asked you a question. Just give me an answer. Just don't. I
You
mean,
lose your patience.
yeah. When some guy says to you, "I can't talk to you right now. I'm icing my shoulder." You say to yourself, listen, I didn't go to medical school, but I think at 14 mil a year, you're coordinated enough to speak with an ice pack sitting on your shoulder. So stuff like that started to bother me a little
Yeah.
more. But at the time, I had been going into classrooms and doing interactive collaborative writing with my Nudging the Imagination programs, and nothing to do with sports writing, and starting to write children's books. And so the career started to beckon, the second career. And when our youngest got out of college and we did the happy dance as a family, several months later, they offered a buyout. I almost tore my rotator cuff putting my arm out. I'm done. Because
Perfect.
I'd been building, it had just worked out, timing, just luck of the timing, that I built something where I could go from one to the other. And just say, okay, I'm done. So in going back for ESPN, I actually wasn't sure I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I get a little extra money, but driving up to Boston and I get to see my buddies. That was kind of part of it.
Sure.
I mean, the members of the American League office actually wanted me to be an official scorer. They say, listen, the game, how,
Yeah.
what should be an error, what should be a hit, no, I just didn't want to make that drive anymore. I just was done,
I wanted to ask you about, before we get to your nonprofit stuff, was there ever, like, writing for the Providence Journal, was there ever a desire for you to write for a big publication or write for ESPN or Fox, something big like that?
No,
never.
No, I think, nor was it a goal of mine to jump from to become a multimedia star back in the day, because that's when talk shows were starting to grow, certainly in Boston and such. And no, I mean, my side thing was my school visits, my working with kids, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed what I was doing, but I had other things, on my plate as well. And I mean, I was covering Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if I went to Chicago or Cincinnati or LA. I'm still covering Major League Baseball. And so it's the Providence Journal. So what? It's still the same,
Right.
It didn't, the cachet of the newspaper and moving to bigger, better, maybe. No, it never really was an enticement for me.
That's awesome. That's good. That, and you still got to do what you love anyway. So that's great. I wanted to ask you, so let's talk about Nudging the Imagination. Kind of tell us what that is all about, and,
Okay,
what's your goal with that?
Well, okay, so Nudging the Imagination is not nonprofit. I do have a nonprofit, which is Rhode Island Write on Sports, WRITE,
Gotcha.
in which we work with underserved middle school students, hoping to help their academic performance by giving them an opportunity to write about something they care about, which is sports. And for that, I am an affiliate of an organization started in New Jersey about 15 years ago. This summer will be our 8th year. So that's the nonprofit.
Gotcha.
The for-profit hat is visiting classrooms and doing interactive writing. Different things at different age levels, professional development. It's grown, so I've done professional development around the country and different conferences, and it's to show, when I'm talking to teachers, it's to give them what I call practical, easy to implement strategies, that they can do tomorrow in their classroom. It's not like, a 4,000 week course at $4,000. Do I get paid to go into classrooms? Yeah, I do. But it's seeing kids excited about writing. So for instance, this morning, I have a granddaughter who's 7. She's in first grade. So I went into Juliana's class and we wrote a story. We get characters and settings from their imagination. I listed on little whiteboards because it's virtual. And I typed this, who's got a first sentence, and give me a color and give me a number. And it's a way to show kids writing can be fun. It's a way to show teachers how they can still have fun with words and writing and still tie into the curriculum, because everything I do ties directly in the curriculum.
Right.
So it's just something that evolved from volunteering in my own kids' classrooms.
That's awesome.
And visiting their classrooms, and then one teacher to another, to writing children's books, and
That's
one of
great.
them, my family is in one of those books.
That's cool too. Yeah.
And so my granddaughter knows that her daddy's in that book, Papa Stevie, Grandma Sue, Auntie Amy, and Auntie Emily. And it's kind of neat, that, there's a book in the family that'll be forever.
That is great. I mean, I want to talk about your post-retirement, because you've been pretty busy, like I said at the beginning of the show.
You know what? Do me one favor, because I'm getting dark here.
Yeah, go ahead. Turn the lights on. Yeah. There we go.
Sorry that's about perfect.
That. No, that's perfect.
I'm realizing. Yeah, my goodness.
That's perfect. Just a couple more topics for you.
Sure. Yeah, that's okay.
I know you were an adjunct professor at Bryant University back in 2017 doing workshops as well. What was that like on the teaching side and not just the writing side?
That was really interesting, and I did it for 3 years up until this year, and there were, the pandemic and all sorts of things,
Sure.
But it's writing the course, and it's a requirement for freshmen, whether they're actuarial majors or whatever. Reflections, informational, analytical, and argumentative type pieces, as well as some other stuff that I would create. And I was stunned. I don't know what you know about education and writing in schools, but there's this process, the 5-paragraph essay they talk about. So the first paragraph you tell, and so even up through, in baseball, you start with T-ball, right? And you move to the minors, and you build on the foundation year after year after year, right?
Right.
But writing, it's still the 5-paragraph essay, which you did in the 5th grade and 6th grade. It makes no sense to me, because it's basically the first paragraph, you're telling the reader what you're going to tell the reader. Then you spend 3 monster paragraphs telling the reader what you just told him you're going to tell him. And now you must figure the reader's so stupid, you need to give them another paragraph that tells them what they just read.
Right.
Okay. So I was surprised by that, and so I said, no, not in this class. And another thing, because I'm in education, and I see it all the time, education legislates out imagination. Doesn't let anyone think. From a writing point of view, here's the prompt, write about this, or this prompt, but that's it. Just those 2 prompts, that's it. And write in a 5-paragraph essay. So I would allow my students to choose their own topics, which they found liberating, but also paralyzing, okay? Because they never had an opportunity to do it before. So, and I also gave them a word limit, no more than 1,000 words, because A, I don't want to read more than 1,000 words. And B, you don't want to write more than 1,000 words.
Good point.
So my mantra to them was say it once and say it well. Because all too often, if a teacher signs a 5-page paper and you're done at 3, what are you doing? You're rehashing everything you said, right? Just to get the 5 pages.
Right.
Why? So I tend to have a little different philosophy than some other people in academia.
I think that's get to the point, right? I don't want to read 15 pages. Give me 3 pages of good content.
And I use baseball all the time. First of all, you got to run through the bag, right? Finish your project strong. Don't just get there. No, finish. Get through the bag. And also, it's in sports, you have to anticipate in writing, you're anticipating the reader, putting yourself in the reader's shoes. Just like, okay, I'm batting against you, right? So I know there's a runner at third, there's 1 out, it's a tight game. You just bounced the breaking ball on the first pitch to me, and the catcher blocked it. But I know as a hitter, there's no way you're going to throw another breaking ball. Depending on the level we're at,
sure.
Right? You may in the major leagues if you're Pedro Martinez, but
right.
But there's no way, you're in high school or whatever. That's it. You're just getting fastball. So you want to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And in writing, you have to do the same thing. So if you don't like to read a paragraph that's this long, why do you think the reader does? Writing is about communication. And if you leave to like the 13th line of a big long paragraph, what you feel is your most important point, you failed. because the reader you're gambling that the reader is going to get to that point and still be half awake.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are some things, everything, sports is, baseball especially, I'm always given the run through the bag type things,
No, it's great.
and think about it. You have to think, so it's like the pitcher, I would have in my AAU team, the number 11 batter's in there. He throws 2 fastballs right by him. He's swinging like a rusty gate. He's way late. And then he outsmarts himself. He throws a breaking ball, and that same swing at that same time and that same path, it's a bloop single to the opposite field. Why would you throw a breaking ball? Well, I'd already thrown 2 fastballs. Yeah. Did he hit him? No. So make him prove he can hit them.
Right. Totally agree with you. You got to think the game.
Yeah.
Last thing I got for you. As far as other than the World Series you've covered, what are maybe a 1 or 2 favorite memories that sticks out over your whole career of covering sports?
Well, I mean, obviously the 89 World Series and the earthquake, and the ball through Buckner's legs. And then, from a football point of view, I was on the field when Adam Vinatieri kicked a field goal through the snow to beat the Raiders, which started the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick era,
Right.
And I happened to be on the field behind him when it happened because of the way the stadium was constructed. You had to walk through those stands to get to the locker rooms. So therefore, the media would come down with 5 minutes to go and stand at the end of the field, so they could then just go in the locker room. And this is where it's all about you, right? So now it's a snowstorm, right? So I'm standing on the field, and he, first of all, it was a fumble. I was there; it was right in front of me. That was a fumble. I'm telling you.
Oh, the tuck rule.
Right, that was a fumble. So now he lines up for the field goal, and if you look at a panoramic shot after it goes through, all the fans are cheering like crazy, except one guy who's on the field like this, because it killed my deadline. Now I didn't know, do I stay downstairs? Do I go back upstairs? I know my deadline is. Who knows how long overtime goes? And so it's not about that's what I'm saying. You lose the fan in you. It's about me,
You couldn't even enjoy it.
No. No, but I'll tell you a couple of things stand out. Perks. Okay.
Yeah.
One is voting for the Hall of Fame, but the other is the Red Sox media always played the Yankee media home and home, Fenway Park, Yankee Stadium, baseball games. So I get to play baseball games at both stadiums, pitch, play shortstop, second base, get some hits here and there, a nice double down the left field line at Fenway, and my son, when he was 14, my parents had brought my son to New York to watch the game, our game, and then a Red Sox Yankee game. And I told him, Jeff, bring your stuff. At the very least, we can walk out by the monuments, take a little BP, play some catch. Well, it turns out we only had 8 guys. So my son, at the age of 14, played a full game at Yankee Stadium, center field, shortstop, and pitched.
That's pretty awesome for him.
And he'll tell you, yeah, but Dad, I went 0 for 4 and my ERA is infinity. but hey, that's okay,
You got to be at the cathedral.
Pinch ran for me a couple of times at Fenway Park, so that was a nice perk.
Any funny Manny Ramirez or David Ortiz stories at all that you have, or just the stuff you remember about covering them? I have to ask, since you covered the Red Sox.
Manny was Arrested Development. Not a bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end, he became a bad guy because he wanted to force his way out. And I wasn't covering at that point. But, I mean, it struck me, there was one year they were playing the Angels in the postseason. And all of a sudden, he decided that he needed a translator. Okay. Now, this is a guy who grew up in New York City. Keep that in mind. Okay. And now we're at the press conferences, and he's having questions being translated to Spanish, and he's answering in Spanish. You say, what the? Where is this coming from?
Right.
I
guys been in the big leagues forever.
Other teammates, they had Kim from Korea, and they had,
But he had been in the States for a long time, and in the big leagues for a while, long enough to know English.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was. Yeah. I mean, what is this all about?
Yeah. Manny
so
he was
like just a big kid, he was and Ortiz, I'm trying to think of, I don't remember a funny story. I do remember an inside the game kind of thing where John Lackey was pitching for the Angels at the time, and I was keeping track of pitch. For some reason, I locked in on how's he going to pitch Ortiz. And in 3 at-bats, he threw him like 13 pitches, and they were all breaking balls, not one fastball. And I remember talking to Ortiz afterwards. I said, after 6, after 7, after 8, aren't you thinking he's got to throw me a fastball sooner or later, right? And he says, no, you still have to see the ball. You're in the back of your mind. You can't let that, And so, just some baseball things like that. So he was definitely affable enough, to be able to approach and talk to, but every player has his side, right? So when the official scorer calls something an error, and the call comes up to the press box and says that should be a hit,
That's a hit.
I mean, or why didn't I get credit for an RBI on that play? I mean, it just seems kind of petty, but you understand it, the competitive thing, and 1 RBI here, but
those numbers could lead to a big contract.
Yeah, but it just seems beneath, certain players, you would think. But it just shows you that even a guy like Wade Boggs, for instance, if he were to go like 0 for 9, the look on his face would say he's lost. He's never going to get another hit,
Yeah.
And as great a hitter as he was, it just shows you I'm telling you like you don't know, but the insecurity of the profession.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a game of failure, as they say.
Right. And the mental part is often tougher than the physical.
Definitely. Is there any way we can follow your stuff online?
Well, I have Facebook pages as myself and Nudging the Imagination.
Where can we find that stuff? Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
You can find me there. But the website is nudgingtheimagination.com.
Gotcha. No, I think that's great. I think what you're doing is great, and you're helping the next generation. So kudos to you on that.
Well, it's fun. It's fun for me because, as my kids say, Dad, you alluded to it. You're busier now than you. Yeah, but in fact, later tonight, I'm going to be in Singapore teaching a journalism class to kids in third through 8th grades, I think, just something that just came up,
That's awesome.
Just because. So, I mean, that's a new experience. So you just never know what leads to what.
I agree with you, man. That's awesome. Well, thank you very much, Steve. It's great having you on. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the episode, man. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Steve Krasner. Had a lot of fun with him. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. As always, you can follow the show at Too Tall Sports Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Too Tall Sports. Please go to YouTube if you'd like to watch the interviews. We post the whole in-person interview there. We do them over Zoom, so we record them and put them on our YouTube channel. So you can watch the whole thing if you want. And if you want to just hear the audio, go ahead and check out Apple Podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review there. You can find us on Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, Google Podcasts, wherever you get it, we're on there. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you can. All the likes and stars you can give us, that'd be awesome. Thanks for listening as always. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next week for another great episode. Too Tall Sports Podcast. We're out.